May has been an interesting month of reading for me. I've got through a lot of books, but I had very mixed feelings about some of them. Had some definite winners, but others that I've kind of have some ambivalence about. So if you've read any of these, I'm interested in your take on them. I'm Allison. Welcome to my channel. If you love talking books, you are in the right place. So let's get into the reviews for May. The first book that I read is American Mermaid by Julia Longray. Now, this was one of my most anticipated books of spring 2023, and this was one that I had those mixed feelings about. So it's about this teacher who has written a book about a mermaid, and it kind of became a literary sensation. So it got picked up by Hollywood, and so she quits her job and she moves to Hollywood to help write the script for this new movie. But once she gets there, she's kind of sucked into the vortex of all the craziness of Hollywood, but she also really doesn't like how her character is being handled. This sort of asexual mermaid that she had created is now being heavily sexualized, and they're totally changing her story. And she starts to feel like the character herself is kind of coming to life, and she doesn't like the direction that the story is taking either. So this does have kind of an interesting format. There is a book within a book, and we almost get to read the entire mermaid book that this author has written, which is interesting. And the book within the book actually becomes a little bit more interesting than the story of this author herself. Honestly, towards the middle, that was the reason I kept reading it all. So again, this is one that I had really mixed feelings about. I did not like the character of the author. She seemed a little too unhinged and messy. I just couldn't quite get on board with a lot of what she was doing. And it's not that I can't read those types of characters, it's just that this one in particular just kept rubbing me the wrong way. So again, I did sort of like the book within a book, although I'm not sure the payoff was worth it to continue reading the entire book. So again, kind of a middling book for me. It kept me reading, but not my favorite of the month. The next book that I read is Community Board by Tara Conklin. Now, Tara Conklin wrote The Last Romantics, which I loved from a couple years ago. This book was very different from the literary family novel that The Last Romantics was. So it's about this woman named Darcy, whose husband named Skip has left her for another woman. So she kind of goes into a tailspin. So she takes a leave from her job and she heads to her small Massachusetts hometown to stay with her parents for a while. But when she gets there, she finds that her parents have actually moved to Arizona without telling her. Now, the house is still empty, so she's able to stay there. She plunges into this deep depression. She's kind of isolating herself and falling into sloth, and she's really angry at her parents and really angry at Skip and writing everybody angry letters that in some cases she sends and in some cases she doesn't. She also spends a lot of time reading the online community board of this small town that she lives in. Now, her job had given her leave, but then they changed their mind and they end up firing her. So she has to find some means of an income. So through this community board, she starts taking on odd jobs for a while. And through some of these odd jobs, she meets this man named Marcus. And he and his husband are building this just elaborate playground for their own children, but also for the children of the community, because they feel like there's a big lack of excellent playgrounds for the kids in the community. So eventually, Darcy hires on with him to help him out with that, and they become pretty close friends. But with all the construction going on, soon the community actually kind of starts to turn against this couple, and Darcy decides that she needs to help them and stand up for them. Now, this was another book that I had really mixed feelings about. For the first half of the book, I just could not stand Darcy. She was whiny, she was lashing out at her parents for no real reason, kind of leaning into her sloth, acting a little bit crazy towards the neighbors. It was very hard to keep reading that without really knowing where the story was going. So my complaint here was that this story had such a slow start to build up to the actual story, which actually did become really interesting, and I became much more invested in what was going on in the community and the ways that they were communicating with each other through this community board and how that all sort of came to a head at the end. And it actually ended up being really interesting, a really kind of heartwarming story of community and the ways that these community boards work and don't work to bring people close together. Now, if you happen to be on a board like Nextdoor, you will definitely recognize the tenor of a lot of these messages. They all sound so familiar. They're a lot funnier in this book when they aren't being posted by someone in your own community, because you know how those messages are. They tend to go off the rails very quickly. So again, mixed feelings on this one. If you can get started and hang on to the end, I do think it's worth the read. But again, just be ready for a slow start. My next book that, again, I kind of had mixed feelings with, and now bear with me because there were actually some winners on this list too, was The Most Likely Club by Alyssa Friedland. Now this is about 4 women who went to high school together, and the title, The Most Likely Club, is a reference to the superlatives that are often included in high school yearbooks. I don't know if they still do those, but they definitely did in my high school. And these superlatives were a big deal back in the day when these women were in high school. But they're coming up on their 25th reunion, and they're all kind of taking stock of where they are. They're thinking back on their goals from when they were in high school, the superlatives that they got, and the paths that their lives ultimately ended up taking. So they kind of decide together that it's time for them to take some steps towards the dreams that they have now. Many of them were kind of based on their past dreams, but they've changed a little bit. Now, I love stories of lifelong friendships, so I was looking forward to this one, and this has a lot of great 90s nostalgia as well. I did graduate around the time of when this book was set, so a lot of it just felt really familiar. The friendships, however, in this book, I had a little trouble buying some of the characters in this book, though. The friendships fell a little flat, especially for these lifelong friendships that were supposedly supportive. They didn't always feel that way to me, and it was just kind of hard for me to get on board with the paths of some of the women in this book. So again, it was okay, it was fine, but maybe not my favorite book of the month. So the next book that I read, I actually listened to on audio, and that was Chain Gang AllStars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Now this is a super compelling sci-fi dystopia that has a bit of a Hunger Games feel to it. So it's set in the near future, in which the US has implemented a gladiator-style sports program in which certain prisoners fight to the death for the entertainment of spectators. Now, if these prisoners survive 3 years in the program, then they are freed from the prison system. The story follows 2 women who are kind of stars in this gladiator sports program, and which means they've survived their gladiator matchups. And they're actually on the same chain gang, which means that until now they have not had to face one another. The 2 women are actually in a relationship with one another, but one of them is closing in on her freedom. She only has a couple matches left before she is freed from the entire prison system. So she's trying to figure out how to help her chain find a little bit of humanity and retain a little bit of their identities, which the whole system is just designed to destroy altogether. Now this is satirical, but it's also just really horrifying, and it moves through the perspectives of various chain gang members, as well as people who are working in the system, spectators, protesters, new prisoners, and it's just filled with interesting insights. The audio on this is phenomenal. The main narrator, Shayna Small, provides most of the narration, but there are also several other narrators that provide interesting voices as well. This isn't a full cast audiobook, and that sometimes doesn't work for me anyway, but the format of this book with the kind of varying perspectives in each chapter make it really effective with the addition of multiple voices. So like the fans of the Chain Gang AllStars, I couldn't look away from this book that is an indictment on racism and the prison system and the role of capitalism in our system of justice. So this one is definitely a winner, especially if you're a fan of Hunger Games type dystopias. So definitely put this on your reading list. The next book I read and listened to in audio actually is The Lonely Hearts Book Club by Lucy Gilmore. And this is a book about a librarian named Sloan who works at a library in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And she kind of has this little snarky back and forth with one of her library patrons named Arthur. And when he doesn't show up one day for work, she gets worried about him and goes to check on him and finds that he's in kind of a health crisis. So her and her neighbor Maisie, they sort of work their way into his life, even though he's really cranky about it. And together they decide to start a little book club. Now this is partly to keep an eye on Arthur, but also partly just to connect with one another over books. Now as they continue to meet, the club actually starts to expand to kind of include some other misfits in town, and there's a lot of backstory that goes into, you know, who's who and how they're connected with one another. But if you love books about books and book clubs and the ways that people connect over books, I think you'll love this, because even though these people have vastly different experiences with books and taste in books, they kind of come together in a very funny and sweet way. Now this would be a really good choice if you also like feel-good books, which I have a video for as well, and I think I actually included it on the larger list of those books, so you can check out that video and the link there as well if you tend to like happy kind of feel-good books like this one. The next book that I listened to is You Could Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith. Maggie Smith is a poet, and she wrote the poem called Good Bones, which actually went viral online a few years ago. You may recognize this poem. And when it went viral, it definitely changed her career, and it also changed her marriage. And her marriage ultimately ended with her husband having an affair, and it ended in divorce. So this book is a very deeply personal and poetic reflection of that time in Smith's life as she was going through this divorce and sort of the aftermath of that. Now, she doesn't really share unnecessary details, and that's mostly for the protection of her children, but her words here really cut to the heart of the pain of that split, as well as how her career was diminished and she was sort of expected to be the default parent even though her, career was blossoming. So there's a lot here about her frustrations and her hurt, but also acknowledgement of her own role in some of those things. So whether you've been through a divorce or not, her voice is just so eloquent, and I sometimes feel like she just ripped open the collective hearts of so many women who are frustrated with societal expectations and our roles, and just sort of read what was written there. And then she translated it into this amazing lyrical prose. So I loved this book. I was listening to it on audio, but I wanted to write down so many of the things that she was saying as she read it. So I may actually get it in print because it just touched me so deeply. All the stars for this one. So if you happen to be in a similar frame of mind as Smith in this one, I think you will love this book. Definitely pick it up. The next book I read is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. So I listened to this one on audio, and it is just amazing. I think you've probably heard of this one. I'm a little late to this party. It's about this elderly woman named Tova who works as a night cleaner at a local aquarium. She does this because she's a little lonely after her husband passed away, and 30 years after her son's disappearance, she is still grieving his loss. So she likes to feel useful. And when she's at the aquarium, she kind of befriends this giant Pacific octopus named Marcellus. Marcellus has kind of a wandering spirit, and he escapes his enclosure every night looking for little snacks and kind of adventure in the aquarium. So when this young man shows up in town, Marcellus realizes that he actually knows something about Tova's past, so he needs to figure out how he can tell her what he knows. Marcellus is a very smart octopus, and throughout the book, there are several chapters where he is actually the narrator, and he has just this wonderful voice. If you can listen to it on audio, the narrator who does Marcellus is just amazing. He really sets the whole tone for the book, so definitely go that route if you have the option. He has these great observations about humans, and his relationship with Tova and the other relationships in the book are just really heartwarming and sweet, and I loved this book. It's this wonderful contemporary fiction novel, and I think that everybody should add it to their reading list. Next book I read is The Life Council, 10 Friends Every Woman Needs by Laura Tremaine. Now, this is a really interesting book because I find that as adults, we think about friendship a lot more than we maybe ever expected that we would. I know that I see a lot of women in particular make posts kind of online saying, I need friends, I'm having trouble making friends. And it's maybe not something any of us ever expected we would have to do, because when we were kids, friendship just came naturally. We were always in proximity to other kids, and those friendships just formed and they lasted for a long time. But once we pass those certain points in our lives where we have that proximity, it becomes a lot harder to make friends. And I think many of us also find that we have certain ideas of what friendship should look like. So in writing this book, Tremaine is actually trying to take the pressure off friendships. So she presents this idea of a life council, which is 10 different types of friends and the different roles that they can fulfill in our lives. Now, 10 friends can feel like a lot. Some of us don't have 10 friends, but she's not trying to say that we should have each of these types of friends. We may have different types at certain stages in our lives. Some friends can fulfill multiple roles. But the idea is to take the pressure off every friendship looking the same. So in this book, she discusses each type of friendship and kind of the roles that they fill in our lives. This might be work friends or fun friends or sort of the soul sister friends that a lot of us think of when we're looking for good friends, as well as both new friends and old friends. And what's great is that she offers ideas for how to nurture each of those types of friendships. She talks a lot about kind of her own friendships, and she has a lot of anecdotes about how they were formed and how they last, and sort of the basis of a lot of those friendships. Now, as you listen, you'll probably start to think of your own friends and who sort of slots into each role. And you might start thinking also about the roles where you don't have a friend that fits into that slot. So one thing I would have loved was maybe a little bit more research on friendships and why they are so important in the roles that they can fulfill in our lives. This was so anecdotal and didn't really include any of that information. But it was really great food for thought, and I actually appreciated a lot of her tips on nurturing friendships. And what was interesting is a lot of them are very logistical, very practical tips, which actually becomes really essential. And we don't always like to think about friendships being something that we need to schedule as an adult. But because we're all so busy and so distracted, it becomes essential if we really want to nurture good friendships. So I really appreciated this book in its sort of framing of friendships and different types. And I think it's worth it for anybody who's looking to make more friends and nurture the friendships that they have. The next one I listened to is Quietly Hostile by Samantha Irby. She's a humor essayist, and I had not really read any of her work before, but I had decided to give it a try. Some of it was very funny. It had me laughing out loud. There's one essay in particular that I really liked, talking about how when somebody tries to make you feel defensive about something that you like, her response is to say, "I like it," in a very enthusiastic voice. And I really loved that essay. She also had a great one about Sex and the City episodes, where she kind of walks through each of the episodes and says what she thinks should happen. And this is kind of relevant because she was actually a writer on the Sex and the City reboot. However, there is a lot of kind of personal embarrassment. She's very open and very open to sharing a lot of things, including kind of a lot of bathroom humor, which, you know, is fine for some shock value. It doesn't really bother me. My only complaint with some of that is that it kind of went on over long, and my mind kind of wandered. So they didn't hold my attention as, you know, she kind of stretched out the stories and continued the ongoing, you know, bathroom humor. So a little bit uneven for me. There were some essays that I really enjoyed and others that I just really wasn't totally on board with. So, but a lot of people really love her stuff. So give her a try if you love humorous books. There are some great ones in here. The next one I listened to is called At Last Count by Claire Ross Dunn. Now, this is a literary fiction novel set in Canada. And it's about a woman named Paisley who has OCD. And her OCD presents itself by counting. She counts in multiples of 8. She often will check things in her home to make sure they're safe in multiples of 8. That's sort of how she copes with a lot of what's going on in her life. So she's lived in this Toronto apartment building for years, but the building is being condemned and all of the residents have to move out. So she's struggling with this big change in her life, and of course the OCD is kind of flaring up with this big change. And she finds herself reflecting a lot on her childhood on Amherst Island, where she grew up. And of course that was when her OCD started to appear. She had kind of a tumultuous childhood. Her mother had some mental health issues, and her dad struggled to deal with those. And she was also bullied by some other kids on the island. And this all kind of comes back to her when she realizes that she may be able to return to her childhood home that she inherited from her mother on Amherst Island. And the lawyer who was actually helping her with this inheritance was kind of the main childhood bully. So we get these dual timelines with Paisley's childhood, where we learn about her parents and their struggles, and then we learn about her present struggles and how she's dealing with this new kind of friendship and trying to trust this person who bullied her so badly in the past. I really loved the dual timelines, and, you know, Paisley as a child, you just kind of wanted to give her a hug as she really struggled to deal with all of the chaos around her. This is a really great literary fiction novel. Actually a pretty good audiobook listen as well, which doesn't always work for me in audiobook. Literary fiction can sometimes be a little bit hit or miss. Wonderful setting, lots of nature tie-ins. Paisley is an avid birder, so a lot of bird imagery is included throughout the novel. Excellent literary fiction novel if you're looking for one of those. The next one that I listened to is Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune. This is a romance novel. It's kind of a second chance romance novel about Fern and Will, who met 10 years prior, and they spent one day together in Toronto, just talking, walking around, touring Toronto. They were both in relationships at the time. Nothing happened between them, but they kind of decided not to stay in touch, but they decided to meet up 1 year in the future at the resort that Fern's family owned. Now, she showed up, but Will never did. She always kind of felt a little bit heartbroken about that, and she never really stopped thinking about him. So now we're 10 years in the future, and Fern's mother has died, so she is at the resort trying to figure out what to do with it, when Will suddenly shows up. He had actually agreed to consult with her mother on the business, and he hadn't realized that she died. And he agrees to stay on with Fern and help her with it. Now, she is obviously kind of torn about this. She doesn't quite know what to think about this serious business person who shows up with a will of the past, was an artist. But they're ultimately very drawn to one another. This is a romance novel. But she knows that something is holding him back, and this big change is a part of it. So she's trying to figure out how they could become close again. Now, this book has some flavors of some of my old favorite movies. There's Dirty Dancing, of course. Also Before Sunrise, which is one of my favorite movies and has that, walking around a city for one day and connecting with this person, and that experience just stays with you for years on end. So I kind of love that aspect of it, as unrealistic as it may seem, that she sort of, held this torch for Will for 10 years and they held it for each other. There's still that great kind of element of the second chance romance, the sort of what if question when you have those chance encounters. So I love that, and I love the setting. It was very kind of romantic and nostalgic. So this is a very sweet romance book, perfect for summer with that lake setting. Great one if you're looking for some good summer reading. So those are my May reviews. I would love to know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. If you liked these reviews, please give me a like and a subscribe. And again, let me know in the comments what you've been reading this month. Thanks for watching.